Yo, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to talk about how much money you really need to invest in HMOs and how you arrive at that definitive number. So stick around to the end of the video to find out. So you're looking to get into HMOs or add them to your portfolio, but you have no idea just how much capital you need yourself or how much you need to raise from an investor partner to actually begin the process of buying the property and then funding the refurbishment works and so on and so on. Well, I am going to tell you the answer, but first, do me a favor, like the video and subscribe. So let's first determine the different types of capital you can use to fund the HMO project. There are three main common ones: your own money, an investor's money, the bank's money. There are other ways, of course, to finance these deals through option agreements, delayed purchases, conditional purchases, and all kinds of other bits that can delay capital requirements. But we're going to ignore all of those for the purpose of this video. We're just looking at straightforward BRR, buy, refurbish, refinance. How much capital do you need to put into the deal yourself or the investor? What equity capital is required to fund the scheme? However, if you want to learn about those other kinds of strategies, then drop it down in the comments below and I'll make another video on how you do option agreements, delayed purchases, and can minimize your initial capital required in some of these types of projects. But for now, let's crack on. Let's get to the property purchase. The main variable will be the location. The location, macro and micro, will determine the cost of the property, which can vary massively. So if you're buying in the north, you could spend about £100,000 and buy yourself a small terraced house that you could convert into a HMO. In the south, that similar profile of property could cost £350,000. However, still in the north, if you're in city central locations like Newcastle or York, then you could still be spending equivalent to London prices. So the purchase price in that location is really going to determine how much capital is required over the whole scheme. But let's assume £100,000 for the average one in the north, and £350,000 for the average one in the south. We're talking basic terraced houses, nothing crazy and big, old Victorian styles. So the local market will determine the purchase price you're going to pay, but so will the condition of the property. And to make this video a bit easier, we're going to ignore the condition of the property. We're just looking for averages here. But yes, the condition of the property could mean you pay substantially less than market value for a given property in whichever area. Now let's add stamp duty. So in the north, that'll be an effective rate of 3% on the £100,000 acquisition. That's £3,000 on top, so £103,000 in total. And an effective rate of 4.4% in the south, which is £15,500 in total, making that £350 purchase a £365,000 purchase in the south. Then the next main cost consideration is the refurbishment. What are you doing to the property? Are you doing major extension works? Are you stripping it all back? Is it a bit of a light touch? Well, we have to determine that to be able to get to a nice average number. So we're going to look at an old 3-bed Victorian, converting it to a 6-bed HMO, all en suites, a nice high spec with a loft conversion, just so that we can sort of broaden and get an average for what most people are likely to encounter when tackling a 6-bed HMO, regardless of where they are in the country. So in the north, for that kind of work, you can expect to pay about £120,000 on average. And in the south, you could pay probably about £150,000. And that's from experience, from things we have seen personally down in the south. But also, there is an adjustment to be made for the labour rate, which is slightly higher in the south. Therefore, you could expect to pay more on your refurbishments in the south proportionately compared to the north. So that's £150,000 in the south for your refurbishment, £120,000 in the north for your refurbishment. Now, you're also going to have a load of professional fees and bullshit taxes that you'll need to pay that are all related to the purchase price, holding costs, and conversion works. Things like solicitors' fees on the purchase and refinance, brokers' fees on any finance you take from the bank, certifications like EPCs, HMO licenses, FRAs, and so on and so on, architectural plans and their associated surveying costs, structural design for the loft conversion, refinance valuation fees, council tax, standing utility charges, accountants, building insurance, and a whole load more. All of these fees can vary massively depending on the nature of the works required for that given project. Even things like stamp duty, if the property is in bad enough condition as per HMRC guidelines, then you don't actually need to pay stamp duty on your purchase, but that is something you need to consult a specialist solicitor on before you go about not paying stamp duty to HMRC. However, we have done it before quite a few times ourselves. We buy distressed assets and you don't need to pay the stamp duty. That is a saving to the project. But we're going to ignore that again for the purposes of this video. So all in all, what do these fees come to on average? Let's just say £15,000. It's there or thereabouts. It could be a lot more on some projects though, and it could be a little bit less on others. So let's just say £15,000 on your professional fees and holding costs. So let's do a Capex summary. First, let's look at the north. What is the total expenditure so far? That's £103,000 including stamp on the purchase price, £120,000 on the refurb, £15,000 additional fees, with a total of £238,000 Capex for the northern project outside of financing costs. Then in the south, it's £365,500 on the purchase including stamp duty, £150,000 on the refurbishment works, £15,000 on the additional fees, and a total capex of £530,000 excluding financing costs. You should also allow for a 10% deviance on these numbers, but for now, they're a pretty good ballpark to work off. However, what if you don't have all of the cash to fund the entire capital expenditure? Then you would need external finance, which comes with costs and restrictions. So we're going to go through them top to bottom. So you'll need one or two things, either an investor or a bank to lend you short-term finance, which can be quite expensive, to fund the development works. Generally, if you can get the money privately from an investor, then you should spend less on your financing costs because you don't have the same kind of time waste and legals and underwriters and monitoring surveyors and all sorts of costs that you have to pay to the bank. However, that doesn't mean that we don't pay our investors very well for any short-term finance they decide to give us. This isn't a sales pitch, and I'll follow the FCA guidelines to not promote fixed-rate financial products to retail investors, but you know where we are. So if you're going to borrow short-term finance, how much will it cost and how much can you get? For the borrowing amount, you can always assume that the lender on a short-term finance will lend up to 65% of the gross development value. This is known as the LTGDV, the loan to gross development value. So 65% is what you should work on. So in the case of the northern property, let's assume it has a gross development value, once complete as a 6-bed HMO, of £270,000. This value will be decided by a RICS valuer appointed by the lender. So they will lend 65% of £270,000 for that short-term finance. The same calculations can then be applied to the southern property, which, let's say once it's finished as a 6-bed HMO, a RICS valuer says it's worth £650,000. This means on a 65% net basis, you will be able to borrow £422,500. Now, those net amounts that you get from the lender for the short-term finance may vary depending on how you structure the finance. So if you're rolling up the interest, let's say, then they may deduct that from the loan, which will reduce the net amount. You also have arrangement fees, solicitors fees, and other bits that can also be deducted from the loan. So let's just keep things really easy and assume they're going to give you 65% net and you're going to finance the interest payments outside of that borrowing. So what will the cost of the finance be? Well, that depends on quite a few variables. The risk premium attached to that project, your experience, for example, the duration of the project, and the market climate that we're in. If base rate's up, then interest is also going to be up. Let's assume in this kind of market, you're going to pay 1% a month for the money, but it's only chargeable when you draw down the funds. You don't get charged interest on the whole facility for the whole duration. There will be such things as arrangement fees, in and out fees, or non-utilization fees for the whole facility, but they're generally a smaller amount. That 1% per month is only on the funds that you have utilized so far, the ones you have drawn down. And obviously all of those can stack up throughout the whole project, let's say over a 9-month period that you're doing one of these projects, from the very start all the way to once you've actually refinanced at the end, allowing for that deviance from practical completion on site and then going through the surveying process to then get it refinanced. So we can average up all of those costs associated with the finance to be about 15% on top of the net borrowed facility. So not the GDV, not the purchase price, nothing like that, not the refurbishment works, just the borrowed amount, add 15% on top, and that's probably there and thereabouts your financing costs for one of these sorts of schemes, assuming it's about a 9-month duration. So for the northern property, you're borrowing £175,500, and at 15% on top of this cost, you're going to be paying £26,325 in financing fees. On the southern property, you'll borrow £422,500, and 15% on top of that is £63,375. And that is the rough cost of the finance. So how much of your own money will you have to put in for both of these scenarios? Well, if the total capex of the northern property is £238,000 and you've then borrowed £175,500, well, the net balance is £62,500. Then let's assume on top of that, you'll pay all the interest to the lender monthly, plus all of the other fees you'll have to pay. So that's a total of £26,325, which when added to the £62,000 means you'll have a total of £88,825 total equity funding required. So that's the amount of money you yourself or an investor has to bring to the project outside of borrowed finance. Now let's do the same maths on the southern property, which with a total capex of £530,000 minus the £422,500 plus all of the financing costs, which will be £63,375, equals a total of £170,875 in equity funding that will be required for that southern HMO. However, I would always suggest you have a buffer amount, which is 20% of your refurbishment cost. This gives you a little bit of a cushion when it comes to getting the finance, and you may get downvalued on the initial valuation, which means either going out for another one or accepting it. They'll lend a lower LTV, which is that 65% amount against the GDV. They'll lend a lower amount, but if you've got a reserve of that 20% there, you could probably buffer that and crack on with the financing. Or if there's just something that goes wrong in the refurbishment, then at least you have a 20% cushion. Always have a cushion on your refurbishment costs. And 20% is just a healthy amount. It's better than 10. So these are just provisional amounts. They don't necessarily contribute to your total capex, but they're a nice buffer. So just ensure that you have those baked in when you're thinking about the financing requirements for any of your HMO projects. So my final answer for how much money you need to invest in HMOs in the UK would be £112,825 for a northern HMO and £200,875 for a southern HMO. So that's how much you need yourself as equity capital to put into the project outside of the borrowed finance that you get on a short-term basis. These numbers don't factor in sourcing or project management fees. If you are to delegate out all the work to third parties, then of course there's going to be additional costs incurred. Now this video was never meant to be an exact bulletproof, here's exactly how much money you need, but I hope it provides a good framework for you to be able to work with when assessing how much money you need on your HMO projects. And if you're starting or thinking about getting into HMOs, then hopefully this has provided a good benchmark. We always say you need in the north about 150 grand. 150 grand means you'll be able to get a HMO done. Probably not a big one, but you could get a 6 or 7 bed done for that sort of money. And in the south, you are needing about 200 to 250,000 pounds to certainly do it, but it probably can be done with less if you are to gear up the debt side of things for the development project. So hopefully with this information, you can use it in your appraisal to see how much money is required for your HMO projects. We have in fact ourselves gone into much greater detail into not only the financing and how you go about getting the financing, whether it's from investors or banks, but also the entire project life cycle, all the softwares and systems and team members and everything else you need to take on these kind of projects. And we've called it the HMO Masterclass. And if you look in the link below in the description, you click on that link, submit your contact information, and I'll drop you an email with everything you need. And it is a course that you will have to pay for, but it will give you just all the information, an A to Z guide as a template you can use to copy and paste when you go about taking on your own projects. So I hope that can be useful to you. I hope this video has been useful. Make sure you drop me a comment for other kinds of videos you want to do. I'm keen to just give away as much free knowledge as possible. So drop it in the comments if you have any ideas. Make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.